I'll tell you. So, even though I've had a lot of glorious moments with fighting, I will always look back at the years of wrestling in high school, and on the way back, we would sing as a whole group Pearl Jam's "Last Kiss," which had nothing to do with wrestling whatsoever. But I don't know, something about like those being with those guys I wrestled with, it was some of the best moments of my life. It really put me on the right path to get into MMA and also stuff that I still have beautiful memories all through and through. But singing Pearl Jam's "Last Kiss" on the school bus, coming back from matches that we won, was by far some of the best memories that I will always hold near and dear to my heart.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Forward Progress with Paulo Salgueiro Jr. I'm your host, Paulo Salgueiro Jr. Miguel loves when I do that. So if he's watching, that's for you, Miguel. Our show is about making forward progress in life through sharing stories with athletes and coaches about their careers, their passion for the sport, their lives, and how those sports shaped kind of who they are today. Today we got a real special guest, Dinis Sweetbread Paiva Jr. Yes. Dinis, thanks for coming on today,
Absolutely, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned, our show is just about kind of introducing athletes, coaches to people, telling their stories, talking a little bit about how sports shape them, their careers, learning from our wins, learning from our losses, and kind of putting some pieces of advice out there for some people. So, really want to thank you again for coming on. For some of our viewers who maybe aren't familiar with you or maybe know a little bit, but not maybe like the behind the scenes of who Dinis Paiva Jr. is, can you tell us a little bit about how your career started or your interest? Obviously, we know MMA, CES. Tell us a little bit about how combative sports started, your interest in sports, a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, from just being a young kid, was always into comic books and superheroes. You know, that Greek god type of mythology thing, right? You know, typically fighters, high-level athletes, you know, boxers. Rocky was a big, right, inspiration early on. You know, they respected their hard work and they're driven. You know, I always wanted to be an individual that can present those kind of characteristics, right, being disciplined and whatnot. You know, I boxed in middle school, wrestled heavy throughout high school. While I was wrestling heavy in high school, the Ultimate Fighter really blew up. MMA was really starting to kind of get some traction. You had fighters like Matt Hughes, who was a big wrestler-based MMA fighter, and then was doing well with some striking. But he was the UFC champ at the time. So while I was wrestling, it just seemed like it was a great fit for me. And then when I got into the sport of MMA, I really didn't think anything of it as far as looking really to get to the UFC. Obviously, the UFC was a platform that was out there. It was showcased. You also had you had Showtime that was doing their MMA promotion that the UFC ended up buying out, Strikeforce. It was blowing up in all cylinders, and I liked the sport, but I didn't really go in with the intent of really having a real lustrous career or something like that. I just thought I would meet chicks and they looked cool and it'd get my name around, get some attention. And it was through the sport, meeting the right people and going through wins and going through losses that I really developed a love and passion for it. And when I started taking the sport more serious and training properly and surrounding myself with the right people is really when my career, turned around, and I had, something that was pretty respectable, consider what I got into it and how I started. But yeah, you live and you learn. You gotta love it, and I love the sport. To this day, even being retired, I still watch it passionately and enthusiast. It's changed my life, shaped me.
When growing up, was it the Rocky movie? Was it something else? Like, what do you remember the moment you were like, damn, I want to try this?
No, there wasn't. It was probably a conglomerate of different things in my life. Whether it was like through boxing, through wrestling, through my passion of comic book characters, and fighting Mortal Kombat, and like all. It just for me there wasn't one single thing that just sent me off the edge. It was just a conglomerate of different things all pieced together. I can say that my brother was a major influence in me getting involved with martial arts. I got my bike stolen as a kid. My brother's one who bought me the bike. He was always a big hero and a father figure for me. I called him up, and he dropped what he was doing at work and drove around the streets of New Bedford with me. He came up from Rhode Island to look for the bike that got stolen. And one of the things he had told me in the car ride was about, getting myself, training, lifting the weights, never be afraid of the biggest guy in the room, take on those challenges. Shortly thereafter, I got into boxing, and then kind of everything took off from there, right? Boxing and wrestling went all hand in hand, and yeah, man, he was probably the one that pushed me off the edge a little bit, get out of my comfort zone to get involved with martial arts seriously and go from there. So maybe that was probably the turning point.
When you start boxing at that age, I'm always curious about like the training aspect and like the sparring. Do you remember like the first time you got punched?
Oh yeah.
And what went through your mind as that happened?
Bells, bells and birds. I remember sparring then. You're wearing 16-ounce gloves. I was probably like 60, 70 pounds at the time. Very small. I've always been a relatively small person. But I remember, the headaches. You had some headaches from probably some early signs of CTE back then because you were over there slinging leather. Generally at that age, you're not really hitting hard enough to really concuss somebody. You're just really learning the basics, right? And everything is survival mode, right? It takes a long time for you to really be surrounded by sparring partners and training partners and whatnot and get comfortable being uncomfortable. So everything was kind of like survival mode, especially when you're in sparring and in training. I used to train in New Bedford at the time. Tony Machado was like a welterweight champion out of the Northeast. He was the guy that was running the gym, South Shore Boxing Club. It was actually a little spot built above the Fisherman's Club.
Okay.
They had a spot in the back, like a loft area up there, and he set a little ring up and some bags and whatnot. And a lot of local kids would go there and train, and that was really where I fought out of at that time.
So getting like, 'cause I always say when I talk to my buddies about this stuff, like the fight or flight response. Was it always like that? All right, we're doing this, or was there ever like a point like you got discouraged, or was it always like, yeah, I'm just gonna try and survive this and throw?
I mean, there's discouraging moments. I fought in the Silver Mittens. I lost this kid, Angel. My God, it's been so long. I can't remember his last name for the life of me. I'm sure I can go look up with some pictures I got with the fight cards and whatnot. But I remember fighting Angel, and I lost in the finals, right? It would have been cool to get in the sport and be a Silver Mittens champion at the time, especially so young and early on. But then I remember having moments where I fought locally. I had teachers and coaches from my middle school at that time that came and watched, right? And here I am, this small little undersized Portuguese kid, taking up the sport of boxing and stuff. So I got respect early on for, although being a small guy, being a tough guy. And then that later transitioned to wrestling in high school and in middle school. Primarily in high school is really where I took off on it. I was a state champion, sectional champion, placed at the Open Nationals. And that just kept building, it was like building blocks, right? You have this little small foundation you start off with, and you start building confidence in yourself. You start taking on different tasks and different orders, and you start building up on that. And, that's what MMA is, right? It's just a conglomerate of built up sports, and you don't start at the top, right? You start with your basics, and you learn from there, and you grow from there.
What shaped, when you talk about like that toughness, like what shapes that? Is it someone's upbringing? Is it just your will? Like what makes Dinis Paiva Jr. tough?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to be different. Speaking for me in particular, my brother roughhousing me as a kid. You have fun beating each other up in the house, right? You grow up with all the siblings. I couldn't put a finger on to like what makes me tick in that regard. It's just the way I'm just cut from that cloth. But it wasn't always like that, right? It's rising to a certain situation, finding out what you're capable and competent of, breaking those barriers, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and then little by little you start to build that confidence to step out and do bigger and better things. At 13 years old, when I had my first amateur boxing experience, I wouldn't have been the person strong enough to go and fight on the UFC Contender Series, right? At that time, I wasn't capable of it then. But it's all those wins and losses and journeys and things you go through in life that you figure yourself out and you figure out how tough you are, and you keep building up that, that resiliency,
What was that transition from boxing to MMA? Like, did you always like MMA, but you just started at boxing? What was that like?
So it really was wrestling, right? So I boxed in middle school. That was what was available, and where I really, I've always had a passion for. And even to this day, I'm still in the boxing gym heavy. Always was considered a heavy boxer when I fought MMA. So I always had that base and that love for boxing. The funny story is my middle school math teacher, Mr. Estevez, was an assistant coach for the high school. I was going to meet up with a buddy of mine who was into like professional wrestling, like WWE, WWF. He was going to sign up for the wrestling team after school. We were going to meet up and hang out. So he told me to meet him there. Unbeknownst to me, I show up and my math teacher is there doing the sign-ups. And he's like, Paiva, you should come and do some wrestling. And I was like, nah, no way, I'm a boxer. I'm a boxer. It's not for me. I think it's, I think it's kind of corny. And the guy's in like these little leotard things. Like, it didn't resonate with me. And he asked me to give him 2 weeks, and he was gonna like boost up he was gonna give me some extra credit of some sort. And I really wasn't the greatest student at that time. So I did. I got into the mat and we're headlocking people and hip tossing and doing all this kind of cool stuff. And it was like roughhousing. It felt like I was back hanging out with my big brother again, roughhousing around the house, and I liked it. So we did a little bit of that. Intramurals is what it was called. I did it through 7th and 8th grade, and I did well. I ended up winning one of the intramural tournaments for the middle school brackets. So when I went to high school, at that point, like I knew I wanted to wrestle. And then I fell so far into wrestling, I wrestled all year round. So there really was no, even though we had our season, we traveled, we had, we had Bay State tournaments in the summer. We went up to Cornell University for two summers to go up there. We stood there for 28 days. We had a sponsor that paid for us and a couple of the athletes on the team. I mean, we wrestled all year round. And that's really where, I was able to make a good name for myself. So I had the boxing background, did the wrestling hot and heavy. Wrestling really changed my life, made me a better student. I had some real great teachers and coaches that came together and supported me to make sure I got, New Bedford was a rough area, and you could go one direction in life, you can go another, right? You zig instead of zag. Wrestling kind of kept me on the right path. I knew if I wanted to wrestle in college, I had to have good grades, I had to have a good GPA, I had to stay out of trouble, stay out of drugs, things like that, and that really was what kept me on the right path in life. Wrestling, in a lot of ways, saved my life,
I grew up in Attleboro, man. We had to play New Bedford High at one point for football.
Yep.
Man, that team was insane. It was just, I remember like going down in our stance and just hearing them growling. And I'm like, this is gonna be a long 4 quarters.
Yeah, big school, man. We had over 3,000 students. Very diverse school. We had, you had blacks, you had whites, you had Asians, you had the goth, we were a very diverse school. A lot of different cultures. Even our wrestling team was just like a mix of all kinds of people. You go to I remember wrestling, I believe it was like North Quincy or South Quincy, one of the Quincy schools, and then literally the entire team was like Asian. And then you went to Waltham, and then like the entire team was like Irish kids and like a few other scattered increments. Like our school in particular was one that we had one of everything you could imagine doing on a wrestling team, whether it was Hispanics and Portuguese and blacks and whites and Asians, and we had it all, dude. We were a very diverse team, which was great, man, and opens up your eyes. You can have love and you can have good relationship with people from all over the world, all walks of life, and I'm thankful for that.
What were some of the early lessons that you learned in high school wrestling, that either life lessons you learned through wrestling? Because I always, in a few episodes ago, I always mentioned that I feel like we learn a lot of things in sports that we probably don't in a classroom or maybe just everyday life. What were some of the things you think you learned either from high school sports or thereafter about life lessons in sports?
The thing with wrestling in particular that I always found was great, and it transfers to life, is it's you and your opponent, right? So it's just you and the other guy. You win as a team in a sense, right? You got a dual meet. Depending how you win your match, you accumulate an X amount, a score of points. Those points go towards the team's total score, and you go match by match, right? So there's been times where I've won matches against my opponents, pinned guys, whatever, but the team lost in total score. There's been times where I lost my individual match, but the team won. So you figure out that you're a contributor to the cause, but at the end of the day, when you're out there in the mat, it's you, right? It's you, nobody else. You can't point the finger at this guy for not passing the ball, point the finger at that person for not making the block. it's on you to go out there and perform. What I learned from it was, the results of hard work. You put your head down, you do the right thing, you drill, you put your time in, and you work hard, you improve, right? It was great was when I'd wrestle somebody early on in my career. A year or two would go by, we end up meeting up again because you're around the same size, you might meet up in the same weight class, right? And there was times where I got so much better that the next time I wrestled that guy, where it was a 2-3 point match, I go out there and pin them, or I go out there and just beat the snot out of them. And on the same breath, there were guys that I used to beat the crap out of when we were younger, and they went and did the same thing. They put their head down, got to the hard work, and then when we met up later on in our career, we had tight, close matches, right? I wrestled one kid, it was a junior year, Gonzalo Sands. Every time I wrestled him, he kept closing the gap closer and closer and closer. I beat him in a tournament. I tech falled him. The next time I beat him was only by 10 points. And then I wrestled him again in the sectional finals. And at that point, it was like a 2-3 point match. So he kept getting better and chasing after me, right? So you knew these guys were coming after you. And that's kind of what life is like, right? So. And
so how does the getting into the MMA world, what was that journey like for you after?
So it's such a crazy story. So I again, UFC was popular, right? I had an interest in it, watching guys on YouTube, right? I wasn't really sure of where to go exactly. I didn't know where the MMA gyms were locally. There was a client at my dad's restaurant who had a son-in-law that was very heavy into the UFC, was a huge fan of it, and he was promoting K1 kickboxing down in Florida, not too far from my family lives down in Florida. So just through small talk, him talking to his son, he's like, hey, I got this kid, he wrestled and did some boxing, he loves UFC, I want him to go out there and watch one of the events. I was only going out there to be a spectator. He had a clothing line, Pure Pain Fight Gear, that he was promoting and whatnot, so he would sponsor the fighters to wear the Pure Pain Fight Gear. They'd go out there and do these K1 kickboxing events in Florida because at that time, that's all that was allowed. They didn't have MMA, amateur MMA in Florida at that time. So, we got to talking, and the conversation ended up going from hey, I'm an enthusiast of MMA, to hey, I have experience with wrestling and boxing, and I would love to be a fighter someday, right? I really think I could do it. So within a few days, the conversation then shifted from going out there and being a spectator to do you want to go out there and do a kickboxing bout? And at that point, I was like, dude, I'm all in. Yeah. Literally flew out there one day, met him. The next day had the weigh-ins. The day after that, fought, won, and came home. I fought this Taekwondo guy with white sneakers. I remember him beating the absolute snot out of my legs with kicks. And I was just punching his face because that's all I knew how to do,
sure.
was just throw punches and whatnot. But I ended up beating him, going back out, fighting again. My whole family was able to go out there and watch it. It was cool. Winning again in this K1 style kickboxing. I really wasn't as well prepared for as I would have liked, but because I had good hands and I was tough, I was able to get the win. And then when I came back, I ended up meeting a guy named Keith Allen. It just happened to be walking by each other at Cumberland Farms in East Providence. He took note of my cauliflower ear. He actually thought I was somebody else. And as we started talking, I was telling him, hey, I just did this kickboxing fight, and I'd love to get into MMA. He gave me his card, invited me to his garage. We started working out. He reached out to an MMA promoter for Cage Titans, Mike Paulver. I got in that card, do my first MMA debut, and the rest was history, man. Once I had that one fight and I lost the first one, it took off from there. I remember I lost the fight. I got so drunk that I was throwing up on myself on the way home because I was so upset with myself that I underperformed. And then I was in his garage the very next morning, hitting the bag, just sweating out the booze from the night before. But that's when I knew I was I'm into this. I really want to do it.
That's what I was going to ask you. After your first fight, did you feel like it was really difficult? Was it that you feel, I don't know, I just feel like we learn a lot from our losses, I always felt. And so, what was that experience like after that loss? What clicked in your head? You said, I'm training the next morning, as opposed to the hell with this.
Just, again, I was a competitor, right? I did really well with high school wrestling, especially as the years went on, right? I didn't like losing. So the fact that I went out there and lost pretty handedly, and it wasn't I didn't get knocked out, I just got taken out and choked out. it was embarrassing, right? Fighters are without a doubt ego-driven in one way or another, right? Whether it's their own personal egos or whether they're trying to, you know, talk out the little bitch in the back of their head. Like there's a piece of your ego that gets involved with it, and that's a driving force. So having my feelings hurt by being embarrassed, right, going out there and underperforming, getting choked out, really set me off the edge of like, hey, I understand through wrestling that you have to drill, you got to put the work in, you got to eat right, you got to run, you got to do all these physical things to get better at that sport. You got to put the time in. It's time for me to now make that transition with MMA. But it took a while, man. There's so many. It's very different with wrestling where it's one art and once you're in it, it's easy to put things together. MMA, there's so many moving parts, there's so many different factors, styles. There's all these different arts, right? You got to work your jiu-jitsu, you got to work your boxing, your strength and conditioning, it's your dieting, it's your marketing, it's fighting the right fight at the right time. There's all these components, man. There's so many variables. You can't just expect to do one thing one way and be successful. You really gotta break up the monotony and yeah, it's just there's so many things going on with MMA, and that's why it's such a beautiful sport, because anything can happen. There's so many different factors. It's so exciting that all these things, styles, and yeah, it's the greatest sport in the world.
What makes a good athlete? What does it take to be a good athlete?
Discipline, right? If you know you have to do something and you don't like doing it, but you do it anyway, you're going to find success one way or another, right? Especially if it's going to benefit you. So being able to be disciplined and do something, regardless whether or not you want to do it, or you find a way to get it done, that's really what will lead to the greatest success. Because you see guys that start off and they're not the greatest athlete, they're not the fastest, they're not the strongest. But they figure out a way to keep on the horse and keep drilling and keep getting better and keep improving. And you have a brick wall, you build it up brick by brick, right? Before that wall becomes big and tall and strong. Being disciplined and doing what needs to be done is what will get you there. So that's like the first factor. All the other stuff will eventually fall into place, right? The more you lift weights, the stronger you're gonna get. The more you run, the faster you're gonna get. The better you eat, the cleaner you eat, the better your body is gonna be presented. So it's just being disciplined and getting through all those heartaches and those trials and tribulations that is gonna lead to success down the road.
Through the training, like you're mentioning, the dieting, the working out, the training, what was the biggest challenge throughout all aspects of training? What's the biggest challenge for you?
Again, staying on the horse, right? So I had a tendency, because I didn't take fighting as serious as I should have, to going through a training camp, right? 8 weeks, trying to eat better, trying to lose weight, going out there, getting physical, having this fight, and then taking off for a month or 2 months and not living the lifestyle of a professional fighter in that regard. And I suffered a lot of losses because of that, right? Because where some guys are going in, they're fighting, they're going through a 10, 12-week camp, they're having their fight. Right from there, a few days later, they're back in the gym working on that craft again. There's peaks and valleys, right, when you're going through a camp. And when you're at that peak point, that's where you're at your best, right? Everything's firing off on all cylinders. And you work to peak off so that when you get to the top of that peak, you're right there for your fight night. So to abandon that peak positioning in your physical, and then take off for a month or two and then go, party and drink and eat all kinds of crap food, it takes you that much longer to come into the room and get back into shape and get back to where you left off. So when I stopped doing that and I continued to training and I started training with the right people, real professional fighters and guys that were going to help me improve in the areas where I felt weak, that's where the success started coming in from. So being disciplined and doing what's right and being consistent is really what's the best way to become superior to any sport you do.
I feel like it's tough too. I feel like the more you start to learn about these fighters and athletes, it's like a lot of those pros still have full-time jobs too, on top, right?
Yeah, I worked throughout my entire career. I had very small blips of time where I tried to do part-time work, but I was always a person, I didn't want to starve either. I liked to have nice things. I tell the story, right? The Contender Series, I was working for Waste Management. COVID was around, right? We were working remote. I had used up some vacation time throughout that year. I didn't really have a whole lot of vacation time left, right? They granted me permission to take my computer, everything I was using at home, fly cross country to Las Vegas. And while I was there for the Contender Series, which is like the moment of my life, right? I was working full time in the hotel room, right? Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, working until 2 in the afternoon, getting a workout right at 3, eating, showering, getting another workout later on at night, going to bed, waking up in the morning and doing it again. So I've worked the entire time. There's very, very few, 1% of the 1% that get into MMA and make enough money to not have to work again. It's just there's not enough in it right now financially for these guys, and it's getting better. Conor McGregor's definitely changed that.
Sure.
Without a doubt, there's way more money in MMA now than there's ever been. But entry level contracts in the UFC, 10,000 a fight, another 10,000 you win. Out of that 20 grand, if you win, you got Uncle Sam to pay, you got your corners to pay, you got your own expenses to pay. If you're active and lucky, right, your first 3 fights in the UFC, you could fight each one of those fights, win, make $60,000 total, right, and that's excluding the opportunity of getting a bonus. You win a bonus, granted that year changes, right, an extra 50 G's absolutely helps. But if you're just a mediocre fighter and you're just winning fights and just getting your name in there, it's 60 grand a year, right? Now back out 30+% for taxes. Pay your manager and your cornerman 10%, 15%, 20%, whatever it may be. You put in a year's worth of work fighting at a professional level, the highest level, right? The UFC is arguably the greatest promotion in the world. To walk away with maybe 15, 20 grand, that's why these guys have to find workouts. It takes a while for you to really build up enough money in the sport to not have to work. It takes bonuses really to get you out there. If by you getting the bonuses, you're going to get more recognition, you're going to get more screen time, you're going to move further up on the card, right? You're going to get more hype because you're finishing fights, you're having the performance of the fight, a performance of the night, a submission of the night. Those are the guys that eventually will make the big enough money to walk away and not have to work anymore. But yeah, it's not right now ready to be designed that way. You look at guys who go to the NFL, right? You look at a kicker in the NFL, they're walking onto the field making $1 million a year, whatever it is, minimal. There's a minimal cutout for that. With the UFC, you got to earn your way there. And although everybody has the same entry-level contract, and the thing I find beautiful about it is whether you're a guy or a girl, your contract's the same, right? Doesn't matter what you're bringing in. Granted, if you have a bigger following and you have like the hype, like a Paddy the Baddy Pimlet or something like that, you're going to get more money as time goes on. But your entry-level contract, regardless of who you are, is the same. It's the same across the board. It's as fair as it gets.
The thing about that I really, and I've talked to Miguel about this too, that I admire about your career is like you always fought like tough opponents all the time. Like, was that always in you? Like I always want to challenge myself. I always want to fight the best I can. Was that mentally, or kind of just like whoever comes my way, I'm going to take them?
Yeah, it was that, right? I wanted to be a company guy, and I didn't want to be the one picking and choosing fights and being difficult to deal with and difficult to work with, which the reality is you get managers to really kind of go through those fights because sometimes, like Thanksgiving plate, right? You make this giant plate because your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right? And then you finally get there on that plate, you only get halfway through and you realize, hey, I'm wasting some of this. So I think it's important to not so much pick and choose, but fight the right people for your level so that you can grow and adapt and evolve, really. You gotta be managed properly. For me, early on, I was managing myself, right? So I didn't know no different. I didn't know any better. I just wanted to beat whoever they put in front of me. So when they gave me an opponent, there was no decision of looking back at the video and me finding this is the guy I really want. Okay, he looks a little good here. Maybe not him. His records. No, I just fought whoever they gave me. And it worked out sometimes not so much. But if anything, I didn't have the most lustrous career as far as my record goes, right? But people know when you go through and you see who I fought and the guys that I beat and the guys that I lost to, I fought all the who's around. I didn't cherry pick fights, and people know that. So even they spoke about that when it came to the UFC, right? They looked at the guys that I was beating and they knew I fought good quality opponents. Guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov, early on, his first 15, 20 fights, he was fighting guys with severely losing records. There was no Yeah, yeah, you look great because you're beating guys that are 10, you're 10-0, 12-0, 15-0, but you're fighting just bums.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I didn't go that route. So I'd rather fight the tougher fights and get the notoriety that way and get the respect that way and the experience that way than try to cherry pick and fight guys that were on my level.
And also, dudes like went to the UFC. You also fought. Like you also fought in the Contender. There's one thing I'm curious about. You had, if my research is correct, it could be wrong, but you got 7 wins from the first round. One first round wins.
Knockouts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What leads to that? Like the training. Like what makes it that successful? That's like I'm gonna win this in the first round.
I mean, typically, your pace, right? Your power is all there. Power is one of those weird things that you can work on it to get a little bit more of it, but you either have it or you don't, right? And you see it come in different forms, shapes, and sizes. You see long, skinny guys that have crazy power. O'Malley's got good power. Boxing-wise, you got Tommy Hearns that was long and lanky. And then you got some guys that are short and stocky that crack with heavy power. Mike Tyson was one of those guys. He was never the tallest opponent, but he had ridiculous power. So it's God-given. Usually your power is strongest earlier in the fight, right? So you come out the gate hot, you start throwing leather. People aren't really used to it, right? Their adrenaline isn't pumping high enough. They don't take the shots as well. I just went out there slinging. I always came to throw bombs, and I hit hard. So early on, if you're not prepared for it, I would catch a lot of guys sleeping and literally sleeping after.
You had 2 title fights. I'm curious about what it's like training for a title fight. Does it change, or is the training's always the same? Like, what's that look like training for a title fight?
Yeah, so the first time I fought for title, I knew I was fighting for 5 rounds, right? So you're preparing for it, you're sparring enough rounds, you're getting that work in, right? MMA, you get 5-minute rounds, so it's 25 minutes of fighting. You really only have 3 minutes off in total time, because you start the first round, you get the break in between round 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and then the 5th round ends and there's no fight. So you get those 3 breaks, those 3 minutes, 4 minutes, however so. In the gym is where that work's done. So you're sparring, for X amount of rounds to make sure that you can go that full time. I knew when I fought Andre Ewell, I made sure that I was running no less than 30 minutes, right? So if I went for a run, I try to get as far as I could get within the 30 minutes, right? I wasn't running for an hour. I didn't care about running for an hour. I wanted to know what the intensity I could push within a 30-minute window, because that's how long I was competing for, right? So yeah, you're preparing for what is there, physically, mentally. You're pushing through those rounds. Boxing rounds are 3-minute rounds. MMA is 5-minute rounds. So making sure that when you're in the gym and you're sparring, you're not sparring 3-minute rounds for, 15 3-minute rounds is not going to do me any justice. I got to make sure that my pace is set for 5 minutes, and that's really what it comes down to. Now, the second time I fought for the title, it all came together the day of the weigh-ins. We had a couple other fights that fell out. They decided that was going to be the title fight. They were pushing that agenda, if you will. We were really originally supposed to have 2 title eliminator fights. It didn't work out, so it was a surprise. I wasn't prepared to fight 5 rounds, right? I went to that fight with the intent of prepared to fight 3 rounds, which generally you're pushing a higher pace for those 3 rounds. You're not going through that feel-out process like you would with the 5 rounds.
What role has sports, MMA played in your life?
It's definitely made me the man I am today. It's humbled me. If there's anything, right? I come from a very humble beginnings, humble backing. I've always showed respect for my opponents as much as I can. Very, very few opponents I fought that I don't talk to this day, or I don't have some kind of relationship with them. Whether guys I beat, guys I lost to. With fighting, it's not like any other sport. You're not passing a ball. You're not blocking a tackle. You're taking a piece of somebody's life with you. They're taking a piece of your life with them, right? Especially when you have a heavy war. You're physically never the same ever again after that, right? And that is something I've shared, that bond with a few guys, right? Especially with some heavy wars that I've had. It humbles you. I think the beautiful thing about MMA, I will use jiu-jitsu as an example, is It's like learning a language. You know very little in the beginning, start piecing those words together, those moves together. Eventually you can have a statement. Eventually from that statement you form a conversation, and then that conversation comes into like a freestyle battle, if you will, and you're using that wit to outwit somebody else, right? But very often you may roll with the big guy who gets the better of you, and then you figure out a few moves, a few words to put together. Now one day you catch that guy. I've been choked out by small guys. I've been out wrestled by big guys. Like it humbles you, right? To understand that you're not always going to be the biggest and baddest in the room. And sometimes it's the person you least expect that comes around and gets your neck.
Yeah, I feel like, I think it was, you mentioned him earlier, I think it was Matt Hughes. He had one, I'm pretty sure it was him who said, if you're undefeated, you're not fighting the right people. Right. Or you're not challenging yourself. So I feel like, especially in martial arts where you just said like humbling people, I just feel like anyone can be tapped out, anyone can be knocked out. I just feel like it takes someone special, man, to like shake hands after that you just punched each other in the face and then be like boys after. But I don't know. It's just something I always wondered kind of what went through people's heads. So I wanted to ask you a couple more questions, then we'll start to wrap things up here. I want to know from Dinis Paiva Jr., what motivates you to train, to continuously work out? What motivates you?
So, entering fatherhood now, motivating me is to stay in shape, to be around as long as I can, to see my kids throughout their lives, right? I want to be healthy. I want to live as healthy and as long as I can. I want to make sure that, when my daughter, and potentially if we have another boy or girl, this next kid, when they have boyfriends, I can still kick their ass. Because I got to make sure I got to make sure that, right? I got to make sure that I'm still the baddest man in the room at that point. Fighting has taught me so much in life. It's brought the best out of me. There's nothing wrong with being in shape and being disciplined and being good to your health. That gave me that enjoyment, that blessing of life. So that's what motivates me now to stay in the gym is, I'm always going to be a fighter at heart. I'm always going to want to fight and be that person. That's just who I am. It's embedded in me. It's a part of my DNA now. And I love doing it. There's never a bad day after leaving the gym. Really, you may have a bad day at the gym, but when you leave and everything's all said and done, it's not a bad day. And fighting has brought that to me. Martial arts has brought that to me, and it's been like that for the better part of the last 25 years of my life. I've been involved with martial arts. It's who I am, and I don't know how I would ever be here or be who I am today without it.
It's going to be humbling because I feel like I don't know if they still do this, but I feel like growing up, it was always like a thing, my dad could kick your dad's ass. And there's like, it's going to be real humbling when someone tries that on your daughter or kids growing up afterwards. But
yeah, you'd be surprised when people still think. I still got people who have never fought a day in their lives. So they have this false assumption of how tough they think they are, and they have no clue. But then you got people who have never fought before, and they understand that there's a lot that goes into it, or they may have had a small little piece of training with somebody, and they're like, oh my God, they had the reality sets in, and it's like going into the water and not being able to swim, like you'll just drown. And people have that false sense of reality. They don't understand what it's really like being in there, or working with somebody that knows what they're doing. You see it all the time in these like world star hip hop videos of guys like mouthing off to one another. And then the fight breaks out, and it's usually the guy who's the loudest that starts flailing his arms out, and you realize the guy, he has no clue what he's doing. It's like, how could you assume you were so tough or played off like you were so tough, but in reality, you really have no fucking clue what you're doing. It just blows your mind away. And then the guys who do know what they're doing are usually the calm, humble guys. They are very confident, and that's what it comes with being comfortable in uncomfortable situations and being prepared. And
you mentioned one thing, there's no bad day after like the gym. And I've always felt like that too with sports or working out. You always feel good. Can you tell me a little bit about what's like sports or working out or whatever? Like, do you think about it helps you with your mental health and stuff like that? You ever think about stuff like
absolutely. That? When I'm not in the gym, my mental health has a tendency to decline a bit. That's how I know I need to be in the gym. And I need to. Granted, I'm not going to be a fighter and competing at that but at least being around the environment, right? Because it teaches you so much, the humility. Today's a good day. Today you got that guy's neck. And tomorrow he gets your neck. You slap hands, you laugh it off. You go to, it just, I don't know. For me, it's been like therapy. And it's the endorphins that get released after it, right? The feeling of camaraderie. You got everybody in the room. You're all working towards a common goal, right? Just to improve in your skill set, improve as a human being, improve as a man. You got all walks of life. They're going in there, and you find a way to bond and share these moments with these people. It's a beautiful thing, man. And I really hope my kids pursue some kind of avenue of martial arts. I might push more than the average parent. Whether my daughter wants to do ballet, I hope she does boxing, or if she chooses that she wants to do gymnastics, I hope she does jiu-jitsu. Like, I want that balance because of the things it's going to teach you. The understanding of hard work, right? You go out there, you put your head down, you drill, you listen to your coaches, you work hard, you push yourself to a certain level where you didn't think you'd be able to get to, or you run 100 yards in X amount of time, and next time around you run 100 yards, and then in a short amount of time you keep pushing that barrier. That's what builds resiliency. Then that's what life is all about. Life's going to beat you down. You need to be able to get back up and fight back.
As a competitor, being retired, does it, I don't know, because I feel like when I finish playing like competitive sports and when I talk to other athletes, I mean, just plain and simple, does it suck, like being retired, not competing? I know you're still training and whatnot, like, so you still get like that, I don't know, like that, it feels like a void, I felt like, but like actually competing, does that suck? Does it,
Yeah, For me anyways, yeah. And it's just, it's the reality of that's why you have to really appreciate while you're in it, because that window is very, very short. Fighting is one of those sports that generally you don't get to do for a long time. You got guys who play golf. You could play golf until your later years, right? Well, after your retirement. Fighting is a young man's sport. Very, very short window. Again, because of the physical consequences of getting in there and competing, it's dangerous, right? It takes life. It takes years of life off you. It's nothing like any other sport. Again, you can go play basketball and there's a level of athleticism. Yes, you can get hurt. You can twist a knee. You can rotate a cuff or something like that, but it's not as physically engaging like it is with fighting, with wrestling. I mean, with Muay Thai and boxing, people die. I mean, and especially with boxing. I've explained to people, they don't understand that boxing is the most dangerous combat sport, and they don't understand when they're watching the UFC or watching MMA how guys are throwing knees and head kicks. And yes, obviously it's clearly dangerous, but nobody's died from MMA, from MMA bout. There's been countless fighters in boxing. And still to this day, guys are dying in boxing because of the amount of blows you sustain, primarily to the head. You can get concussed. It's just so dangerous, man. That's why those sports are like nothing else. And you can't play. You don't play fighting. You don't play boxing. You're fighting. It's just not something to be taken lightly. And you got to be serious. And that's why you got to train hard and be prepared. I mean, you mess around, like, you could really get yourself hurt.
So we got one more fight?
I'm always going to have one more in me. I'm in the gym now, staying consistent. In a perfect world, I'd love to do, a swan song. I went out on 2 losses, back-to-back losses. Wasn't ideal. It wasn't premeditated. Sure. I've told people this story. Like, when I went to my last fight, I didn't have that conversation in my head prior of like, this goes my way, this is what's going to happen next. It was a very emotional decision I made in the moment. I remember at the end of the fight, I got choked out. Josh Smith, man, he broke my nose. I was winning the fight in the first round, dropped him a couple times, thought I was one step ahead of him the entire time. And this is the crazy reality of fighting, is anything could happen at any moment. And boom, I get hit with a wanky shot, tip of my nose, breaks my nose across my face. The trajectory of the fight swings from one direction to the other. But I remember at the end of the fight, looking out, and the first person I saw was my wife, and she was crying, and she's next to my mother, and then they're crying, and I like shift in my head, and I see my father, and he's just nodding in disapproval at me. It was the first time in my entire athletic career I'd ever lost live in front of my mother. First time ever. From boxing, wrestling, kickboxing, MMA, ever. I had lost on television. My mom wasn't in the audience, something like that, but it was the first time in my entire career of all combat sports I ever lost live in front of my mother. So that was like another deciding factor. Fighting is a very selfish sport. Takes a lot of time. It's all about you, me. It's my time. I gotta go to bed. I can't eat that. I gotta go train. It's all about me. Me. And my wife, God bless her, she supported me from day one. She sat on the sideline. So it was just time, man, at that point. I wanted to fight for a living. I was two losses in a row. I was pushing into my mid-30s. Yeah, it was just an emotional thing, but I would absolutely love to have one more last dance, knowing now that it would be that last one, because I did it in the moment based on emotion. I don't regret it, and if I never fight again, I did it right. But I think one more will probably eventually end up happening at some point.
Hey, man, George Foreman was in his 45, 46 when he came back.
Yeah.
So, hey, we got a couple more questions, and we'll wrap up here. Dinis, favorite memory from sports? Favorite memory of all time?
Single favorite memory?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, so even though I've had a lot of glorious moments with fighting, I will always look back at the years of wrestling in high school. And on the way back, we would sing as a whole group Pearl Jam's Last Kiss, which had nothing to do with wrestling whatsoever. But I don't know, something about like those being with those guys I wrestled with, it was some of the best moments of my life. It really put me on the right path to get into MMA and also the stuff that I still have beautiful memories all through and through. But singing Pearl Jam's Last Kiss on the school bus, coming back from matches that we won, was by far some of the best memories that I will always hold near and dear to my heart. And I'm friends with a lot of guys that I wrestled with, and I love how well they're doing in life. And again, you take those examples. I mean, there's a lot of guys that I wrestled with that turned out to be pieces of shit. They all turned out to be great people.
Yeah.
And I think it was because of our coach and because of that mindset that brought us all together, that kept everybody in the same trajectory to succeed no matter what they did in life.
I don't know what it is, but I just feel like high school sports is just completely different than, like, you talk about the camaraderie or whatever. Like, I feel like if I interviewed like pro football players or basketball players, I feel like favorite memories would still be in those high school days, and I don't know why, but I think I don't know. It has to be like that camaraderie. I feel like when people stop playing, like, I don't know, like a lot of people don't play college football. People don't go on for college to pro, and I feel like the camaraderie is like, I don't know, there's nothing like
those
that.
moments you share, and to your point, right, to get to the next level, to play college football and professional football, this very few and far between. Anybody can walk onto your high school football team, just about try out, and if you're decent enough, you're going to be able to play in some facet. You may be JV, you may not start, you may be fucking third string, but you're on the team, you're all winning together, losing together, and it's good times, good memories.
Your Mount Rushmore of fighters.
My Mount Rushmore?
Yeah. All time.
Let's see. Anderson Silva, GSP, Fedor, and Mighty Mouse.
Solid
So
picks.
Mighty Mouse, GSP. You can argue Fedor and John Jones. Those are like the two.
Sure.
Those are the two because, I mean, John is one of the guys that, regardless of whatever issues he's had, right, I don't think that it really would have changed because he's still as dominant today as he was years ago, and you haven't seen anybody else do it, like that. What I love about, in full prime, I think, like, Anderson Silva in his absolute prime was the greatest thing the sport has ever seen. Right, the way he was knocking people out and how easily he was doing it, unbelievable. Then you look at Demetrius Mighty Mouse, who's like the complete full fighter, right, where he's spectacular at everything he does, and his mindset is unbelievable, and he just, he's had losses, came back and redeemed himself. And then GSP was the guy who wasn't great at anything in particular, worked his ass off, went and trained with the best people, and he just was the best at putting it all together, where he came back from losses, avenged those losses, took long layoffs, went up in division, came back, knocked out, like he just, So Anderson Silva, GSP, John Jones / Fedor, That one's like a toss-up, and Mighty Mouse.
And then I always like to finish with kind of what the show is about, forward progress. Maybe we'll put some fun little training things too for people. Maybe they can learn something at home too later. But one of my favorite questions, if you were to give a piece of advice to someone on how to make forward progress in life, forward progress in a sport, what piece of advice would you give them on how to make forward progress?
Consistency. Find passion with what you're doing, right? Whatever you decide you want to do, you're going to hate it sometimes, but if you love it to your core, that's what's going to keep you in it, right? There's a lot of shitty moments with fighting, right? The weight cutting I've had issues with, the injuries. There's a lot that will steer you away, right? Don't listen to the naysayers. Listen to that fire that burns within you. If you have a dream, keep that dream alive. I've had too many people in my life that don't see things through my eyes, and they try to speak to me and relate to me on things that they have no understanding. And it's not their fault, right? Even when it comes back to the fighting thing, right? People don't understand how or why I did it, but I can't expect them. They didn't grow up the way I grew up. They didn't live my life through my eyes. They don't see things the way I see things. They can't relate to that, right? You're gonna get people that will try to talk you out of it because they're not confident to do it themselves, or they've never done it before. They can't relate to it. So if you have that dream, stay on the course, stay disciplined. Don't ever let that dream die, right? And you may never attain it to the level you want it, but if that's what keeps you moving forward in life and progressing forward progress, then keep at it, man. Don't let anybody try to talk you out of something that makes you happy, especially if it's good for you in one way or another,
I had one more fun question in there, because we both got Portuguese in us. We both like food. Favorite Portuguese dish?
Polvo.
Polvo.
I would, yeah. So polvo assado.
Com aquelas batatinhas.
Oh my God, dude, it's that. Brasa is probably another one, and I don't get it too much. And to be honest, dude, a really well done feijoada.
Yeah. Like this.
Like this, querido. Yeah, man. It's good eating always. I love my culture, man. I love being Portuguese. Obviously super biased because you grew up around it and whatnot, but we got some of the best culture in the world, man. We eat well. We're tough, hardworking, disciplined people, right? It's just a culture to be proud of, very, very prideful. At one point, we were the top dog naval fleet in the world, right? We sent Christopher Columbus on the Santa Maria, right? We had Portuguese navigators on there. We've just been relevant in all throughout history. Just very proud to be Portuguese by a long shot, man.
Dinis, Sweetbread, Paiva Jr.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on,
Absolutely,
man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Forward Progress with Paulo Salgueiro Jr. Today's guest has been Dinis, Sweetbread, Paiva Jr. Stay tuned for a lot of upcoming episodes too, and how to make forward progress in life. Thanks.